This GeekWire podcast is brought to you by BECU. Stay tuned to the break as Brian Westbrook interviews BECU's Stacy Black for today's Money Hack about strategies for financial planning when your income is irregular. For more money hacks, check out geekwire.com/BECU. Hey, are you a mouse person?
Yeah, I didn't bring it today.
I have to say, I am so addicted to my mouse, my red Microsoft mouse. I have a confession. I got into the office today and I realized I didn't have the little dongle for some reason, the USB dongle. I thought about using a trackpad all day, and the thought just gave me so much pause and frustration that I went home and got the dongle. And it was about a half an hour, 15 minutes each way. And I was just sitting there kicking myself the entire way. But it's amazing how just like this, decades old technology is something that I'm so dependent on still.
Yeah, I feel like I could get away with trackpad in a pinch.
You wouldn't go home.
I probably would not have retreated to go get the mouse. But I get it. Every day I use one, but I would not make a special trip to get one.
I could have done it, and I have done it in the past, but it has made me so grumpy by the end of the day to be using a trackpad because I just find it unwieldy. It's like using, like a piece of spaghetti to try and point at something. It's just, I get it. I understand why people are okay with trackpads. It's just not me.
It'd be a fun survey of GeekWire readers. I guess it would tell us how old our readership is.
Yes.
If they lean mouse.
I'm pro mouse. Hi, everybody, and welcome to GeekWire. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop, and I'm pleased to be joined here in the GeekWire offices today, appropriately enough, given the topic that we're going to be talking about, by Kurt Schlosser, GeekWire reporter. It's great to have you here, Kurt.
Hey, Todd. Good to be here.
So you and I, a few weeks ago, went on actually, it's been a couple months ago now, we went on a tour of the Microsoft campus, the new campus. You also, just this week, went to a physical office space in downtown Seattle, the new Remitly offices. So I want to talk about that a little bit coming up later on, because it's kind of an anachronism, if I'm using that word correctly, that we're talking about these physical office spaces in this world of hybrid work. And I had to specifically ask you, Kurt, to come into the office to have this conversation.
Yeah, you're really cramping my style. I had to come in from home to talk about going into the office.
So that's coming up later on. But first, there was an interesting deal this week that struck me as a little bit odd. You covered it. It's Amazon and the New York Times inking a deal for Amazon to license the New York Times content for its AI platforms like Alexa. And I was trying to figure this out. It's really kind of unusual in that you wouldn't think of Amazon necessarily as being the tech company that would license New York Times content. But then you start to think about all the dynamics that are happening in the industry right now, not only in media, but also in the tech world with Microsoft and OpenAI involved in a lawsuit filed by the New York Times against both of them over content. And you can start to see where this might be a wedge. But just in terms of basics, this seems like it's pretty simple that Amazon is going to be able to ingest the New York Times content into its large language models.
Yeah, this was like a 2-paragraph news release from the New York Times company on Thursday this week. Amazon didn't even comment on it when I asked them. They pointed to the New York Times and said, we don't have anything beyond their release. So pretty to the point as far as the newspaper is concerned and the tech giant that is going to be leveraging its content for what it calls a variety of customer experiences. So I don't know, maybe you look up a blender on Amazon and all of a sudden it surfaces some AI summary of a New York Times cooking article about blender recipes or something. I could see the synergy there between product and editorial. It's just such a new twist for Amazon. This is, as some reported, a first of its kind arrangement for Amazon and a first of its kind agreement for the New York Times as well.
And it seems in that way like it could just be setting a benchmark in a lot of ways. You could see the New York Times now going to others and saying, hey, here is what Amazon paid us. you should be paying us the same thing. And especially in the context of the lawsuit that the New York Times filed against Microsoft and OpenAI back in 2023. I can't even believe it's been that long, but it was back in December 2023. You could see them going to the court and saying, well, hey, Amazon found value in this content that we allege Microsoft and OpenAI are ripping off and illegally incorporating into their large language models. So, if Amazon finds value, why can't we extract value legitimately from Microsoft and OpenAI? The other interesting piece of background here is you've got Alexa Plus, Amazon's new version of its voice assistant. And apart from the e-commerce portal, I could see that being someplace where Amazon uses content to provide information to people who are making voice queries to the new Alexa.
And also having future versions of Alexa trained on New York Times content. Part of the agreement calls for training other artificial intelligence models developed by the company. So I think they got this deal in place, and then how it plays out is to be seen. It's interesting because OpenAI has deals with other publishers, including the Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos. So it's like, what's his thinking? I don't know. Day-to-day operations for Amazon, probably not much, but the New York Times and Amazon getting together while OpenAI is working with the Washington Post and being sued by the New York Times. It's quite a twist.
What's Jeff Bezos thinking right now? I think Jeff Bezos is thinking bachelor parties and wedding cake. When is the wedding? Is it coming up in June? Is that right? Come on, Kurt. You're our Geek Life reporter. You should know that like the back of your hand. I think it's coming up soon.
I'm still waiting for my invite to that.
Yeah, I did think that was interesting. And I wondered if it was part of the reason why Amazon didn't say anything publicly. I doubt that Jeff Bezos was directly involved in this. My sense is that he's not really, haunting the day one tower day to day these days, especially given that he's officially moved his residence to Miami. But I do think that they're sensitive to the fact that he owns the Washington Post. And if they're seen to be aligning too closely with the New York Times, then perhaps that could set off the wrong impression, or at least if they spoke about it too publicly or aggressively.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then in terms of the media revenue model, it's somewhat interesting. I still think this kind of stuff is very minimal, kind of incremental kind of revenue, even for large companies like the New York Times, when they get money from a tech giant to license their content. It feels like it's just a little, a decimal point on the annual results.
Yeah, I wondered about that. The terms of the deal obviously weren't shared, but it is multi-year, so we'll see how it plays out.
So I will link to that story from the show notes about Amazon licensing content from the New York Times. That was the most read story on the site this week. So people have a lot of interest in that one.
GeekWire needs a licensing deal.
Hey, we'll work on it. It's on my list. Actually, it's not, but okay, coming up next, we'll go behind the scenes at Microsoft's new Redmond campus and Remitly's new downtown Seattle office.
I'm Brian Westbrook with GeekWire Studios. Money Hacks presented by BECU. On this episode, we're talking about those with irregular sources of income. Now, what does that mean, Stacey Black?
Yeah, it could be if you do freelance work, contract, or seasonal work. It's whenever you don't have income that's a regular, steady amount that you can expect.
And that means a lot of challenges, everything from healthcare to how to save. You've got a lot of great tips in this episode of Money Hacks. We'll check it out at geekwire.com/BECU. I'm Brian Westbrook, joined by Stacey Black, lead financial educator for BECU. Check it out.
Listen to the full interview and find more episodes of Money Hacks at geekwire.com/BECU and find more information at becu.org. Welcome back. So, Kurt, a couple months ago, as I was working on some of the final pieces in our Microsoft at 50 series, looking at the company's anniversary, I got a chance to go over to the Microsoft campus, and I said, hey, Kurt, come on with me, because you're a great photographer. And when you do a tour like that, it's nice to be able to focus on listening to the people and not have to worry about taking photos. And you did a great job getting pictures along the way. So I appreciate you going with me.
Yeah, that was fun. And I agree. You almost want four hands when you go by yourself to be able to handle your recorder, the camera, your notebook, just pay attention to whoever you're speaking to. And you can miss photographic moments when you're doing that. So that was a good opportunity for the two of us to share.
And we got to drive over there together. I will admit, part of my motivation was we don't get to spend time together in the office because you're not in here, which I had to give you a hard time about. The recurring joke on this episode. But anyway, part of it too was I do look occasionally for times to go do little adventures with colleagues as a way of connecting in a way that we might have in the office in the past. But we got to walk around this new campus. And for people who've been to Redmond in the past, this is the East Campus. It's on the east side of State Route 520. And back in the day, this was where Microsoft had their original X-Wing buildings. I have gotten lost, or I did get lost, in those buildings more times than I can count. I mean, they were so difficult to navigate. You would go down a corridor, think you were going to one place and end up in another. And it was kind of the epitome of bad office design, but Microsoft loved them because they had office doors. And this was a recruiting pitch back in the day for Microsoft, that if you came to work for them, you were guaranteed to have an office door that you could shut, so you could basically just focus on the code. And that was the approach. But those buildings are gone.
Maybe they were ahead of the times with getting lost, because that would keep you in the office. Now they do it with free drinks and all kinds of other perks. But I'd spent, I don't know, about 8 years out there on campus in Building 25 with MSNBC before my GeekWire days. It looks nothing like that from when I left in 2015 or so.
The campus, and especially that part of campus, it always felt like it was very much in the middle of a forest before. It was evergreen and it felt more like an oasis. And the new campus is beautiful. But the thing is, it's kind of sterile. It's fancy. It's a little bit corporate, funky, I would say. They really make an effort to give it some personality, but it doesn't have that kind of family feel to it. And when I say family, I think I'm referring to more of a corporate family. I watched some of the old videos of Lake Bill and Steve Ballmer and the late Mike Maples Sr. jumping in there as the entire Microsoft employee base, it seemed, was around there. And it had this real feel of camaraderie back in the day, that it feels like that close-knit, smaller campus really created there amidst the trees. And you've got in the new campus these vast expanses of concrete, this big courtyard in the middle of everything. I don't know, what were your impressions?
It feels like if you took Amazon and pancaked it, in the suburbs, I guess, which is, I guess, what a lot of these places are designed to feel like. They have nice amenities. They're modern. But I agree. In the old space, it always felt like little Ewoks were going to walk out of the woods.
Yes, exactly.
Like, are we on Andor? What's being made here? It's so cool. Everyone has a beard. And now it's just like everyone's kind of heads down and they have a long walk to their next building or their next lunch, or if they even come out of the buildings. And I get that vibe. It does feel a little more sterile.
Yeah. The way that they've set up the space is that the work areas where the desks are all on the outer rings. So they make sure that they have natural light. Then the team spaces and the common areas are more toward the core. And then sprinkled throughout, you do have these other kinds of rooms for contemplation, relaxation, reading. And it's such a contrast. I was going back and reading passages from Gates, the biography by Paul Andrews and Stephen Manez back in the day. And one of the points they made was that Microsoft's original campus was, quote, the finest physical expression yet of the Gatesian ethic of work, work, work. And this feels like this is more about productivity and collaboration and this more well-rounded view of work. The juxtaposition really struck me. And the other point I would make is they really consider this a living experiment. I mean, these buildings are not done. And that was really gotten across to us by the folks we spoke with, that they roll out new ideas, new formats, new types of rooms, new office spaces. Teams can basically do whatever they want within the space, within the formats that Microsoft offers. And in that way, it's more like a modern piece of software that gets updated regularly, as opposed to that operating system back in the day that got updated every 3 years or was just put out once.
Yeah, I imagine that the architects and office designers of 2025 are a little weary of the next potential global event that could shift the way people work. And so maybe they're not as locked into a design or a way of working in these physical spaces that they can't just adapt quickly. All of a sudden, everybody's gone. Now what are we going to do? Well, let's open up this wall and move this and this. The old campus felt like a place where you went to work because that was all there was to do there, until it sort of evolved into having these fancy dining areas and so forth. The new campus feels like they're trying to make it a lifestyle. Like, I work for Microsoft and I live Microsoft.
Yes. It really feels that way. The restaurants especially, I was there on a real sunny day this week, and one of the restaurants had all of their doors open to the outside, these big floor-to-ceiling doors that they opened up onto the deck, and it was beautiful and gorgeous, but it felt very purposeful to the point of lacking a certain funky charm that you might have in something that was a little more organic and didn't come from the workspace team.
Yeah. You might say the same thing if you walk around certain neighborhoods in Seattle and stuff's been replaced by new. 50 years from now, maybe this current Microsoft will be getting bulldozed and we'll be like, remember how cool that was? They opened the windows.
Exactly. The one other thing I wanted to point out was in the time between our visit and actually me getting around to publishing this story to wrap up our Microsoft at 50 series, there was some major news from Microsoft that had almost a direct impact on the future demand for this office space. Microsoft announced 6,000 layoffs globally, including 2,000 in Washington State. And of course, the majority of those would be in Redmond. And it's still a pretty small fraction of the overall employee base that Microsoft has here. That said, I do think your point is well taken on the flexibility that is needed in these office spaces, not only the existing ones, but Microsoft has not yet given a timeline for finishing the remaining buildings that are part of the master plan as part of this campus redevelopment. There are several more buildings. Some of them are already under construction, but then there's even several more beyond that to get up to the 17 total new buildings that they'll eventually have, or at least that they planned to eventually have. And they have not given a timeline for when they're going to restart that. And to me, this is in some ways then symbolic of this new era of AI and a lot of the cost savings that companies are looking for by leveraging artificial intelligence tools to augment human work and in that way not need as many humans as they might have otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, we're reading those headlines pretty regularly now, aren't we, about entry-level jobs are going away because of AI. White-collar manager jobs are going away because of AI. It's like, who's going to be left on this massive campus?
Clippy and Copilot.
I wonder if they eat lunch together.
All right, you got to experience a totally different work environment in downtown Seattle. So let's talk about that when we come back. AI is moving fast. Are we keeping up? Join Seattle University's Ethics and Tech Conference on Wednesday, June 18th to explore the evolving legal and policy landscape governing AI. Register at seattleu.edu/ethics. That's Seattle University's Ethics and Tech Conference, June 18th, seattleu.edu/ethics. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop with Kurt Schlosser. We are talking this week about kind of a throwback Office Space.
Great movie.
Yeah, exactly. That was a great movie. So Kurt got a chance to not only go with me a couple months ago to the Microsoft campus to experience the new East Campus, but also to downtown Seattle this week, where Remitly, the money remittance company, opened its new headquarters just a few blocks away from where they were previously. I saw the pictures that you had, Kurt. This looks really fancy, really cool. it looks like a very purposeful attempt by Remitly and their CEO, Matt Oppenheimer, to get people to come into the office. At least half time is what their goal is.
Yeah, Remitly does have a 50% policy. So that's 50% of your time basically in a month. They expect you to be in the office. And if I work there, I would want to be there 50% of the time at least. It's in that Rainier Square skyscraper, which is at 4th and Union, gleaming, curvy building that's 50-something stories high. Amazon was going to lease about 30 floors of it and backed out and subleased it.
Yeah, that's the tower that Amazon backed out of after they got hit with this huge tax that they didn't want to pay that ultimately ended up getting rolled back. But I think they probably could have used the space, but they used it as a symbolic move against the city of Seattle to say, hey, we're not going to expand here. We're going to start expanding more aggressively in Bellevue on the other side of the lake. But that's a whole other story.
Yeah, I mean, I did think about that a lot being in there because I've been in the new towers, Amazon towers in Bellevue, and I'm like, well, this build could have very well happened right here in downtown Seattle. Instead, Remitly's in there, and they've done a nice job across 3 floors. They've got more than 500 workers in Seattle, 2,800 globally, and they're very intentional about calling it a global headquarters because it is their gathering space for when people from around the world come to the HQ here in Seattle. And the design is very intentional in that, you know, I wrote this in my story, you feel like you're a world away, even though you're right there in the heart of Seattle. Everything has this sort of aesthetic that you could be in Africa, you could be in Southeast Asia, you could be in the Middle East, North America. Every meeting room is named for a different city and has a film over the windows that has a cityscape from that place. Everything is very well thought out. The floor tiling, the plants, the lighting. For a corporate office, 10 stories up in the middle of the city, it's pretty escapist.
Part of the idea, as I understand it from your story, was that they wanted to acknowledge and pay tribute to their global mission. I mean, they are an international money remittance company and financial services company, and so that makes a lot of sense. The one thing that stood out to me was they have a developer-favored low-light zone called The Cave.
Yeah.
This sounded cool. What was that like?
This was, I don't know how many square feet The Cave is. I went into it yesterday with Heather Rogers, the real estate chief for Remitly, and it was not pitch black, but there's sort of rimmed lighting around at about waist level, and you can adjust it, but it's got like a purple hue to it. Felt like kind of walking into a movie theater after the movie had already started. There were 2 women sitting in there who weren't on laptops, so there was no sort of ambient light coming from them. But I could see where a coder who's just like that super hyper-focused type would go in there and just lose themselves for their shift, part of their shift, to get away from, because there's a lot of natural light in the surrounding office. So you go in here and it's, where am I? I could be anywhere. It's very popular. When they mentioned it during their discussions before the ribbon cutting, it got a loud round of applause.
Really?
Yeah.
It struck me that maybe this is something Microsoft should experiment with because it's so much in contrast to what we saw. I mean, there the default assumption was people want natural light. And here you have, in the space that you visited, something that was completely the opposite.
Remitly is very focused on the diversity and the neurodivergent focus that they pay toward employees, and took a lot of feedback from employees about what they wanted. And this was one of the rooms that came out of that. Certainly, you can find a corner of that space on any of their floors where you're bathing in light and looking at Elliott Bay and get a completely different experience.
Next thing you know, they're going to have offices with doors.
There's a lot of those pods, those little pods that people get in.
Yeah.
There's many, many different little closet-sized rooms with just a desk and a plug. There's meeting rooms galore, more than 75, I think she told me. Big conference rooms, huddle spaces, booths. Booths are really popular now. I've noticed it at Expedia, Facebook, Google, everybody wants a booth.
Yeah.
And the booth should be sort of enclosed. Like you can't, there's a lot of this attention toward, don't really look at my screen behind me, please. so like high back chairs and huddle spaces that have high backs. And so privacy and focus is still important.
I've seen those at WeWorks too, like along the side of the common areas. And I know from going into the Ballard WeWork at times, just to take tours and stuff, that those are in very high demand, those booths.
Sure. I mean, think about when you walk into a diner, can we get a booth, please?
Right. Yeah.
Instead of a table out in the middle of the room.
I can see that. Maybe we should do that in the GeekWire offices. That would actually be really cool.
Maybe I'll come in.
Okay. Speaking of, here's the question. Here's the ultimate question. You, as a focus group of one, Kurt, if you had to choose, all other things being equal, same job at Remitly or Microsoft or Amazon or any one of the other number of office spaces you visited, but mostly Remitly and Microsoft because that's what we're talking about. Where would you want to work? Which environment would you want to work in and why?
Wow, I think Matt Oppenheimer asked me that question when I was leaving yesterday. He wanted me to get back to him about
here you go, Matt.
What they're doing differently. And, they both have their benefits. Remitly is really bullish on being part of downtown Seattle and part of the recovery post-pandemic and doing their part to bring people and energy back to the city. I love that about any company that's doing that. And I think it does make a difference to have people in the core of the city. Microsoft, free parking, what? Maybe there'll be a train someday that'll go across the lake and get me out there.
Hopefully someday.
I do like the open space. I could imagine you start to feel like you've seen everything once you've been inside this tower for an amount of time. So maybe the ability to go for a run in Redmond from the campus on, they have trails out there along the headquarters. So it's the food. There's no food made at Remitly. I mean, it's obviously, it's kind of like that old school tech kitchen where it's like tons of snacks and recharge stuff and drinks and coffee. But it's not like Microsoft where there's a full-on dining experience with different types of cuisine.
Yeah.
So my answer is I'd like it to be one company and I switch between offices every few days.
I like the fields at the Microsoft campus, and that is the one place where I've witnessed some of the camaraderie that I was referencing earlier. You see people out there playing soccer, especially. I haven't seen anybody playing cricket yet. Maybe I just haven't been there at the right time. But there are so many cool fields on that new campus that I think that makes up for some of the sterility of the rest of the experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I don't know whether I would jump in Lake Bill or whatever as a way to get my nature on on the Microsoft campus, like Steve Ballmer did. But taking the elevator down to the street and walking around the city has its sort of joys and benefits. But stepping out and being able to walk around in nature is kind of nice too.
All right, well, cool. We got to experience some places in the real world this week, so let's dive back into our computers. Hey, Kurt, thanks very much for coming into the office to talk about this.
Thanks. That was fun.
Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll link from the show notes to all of the stories we discussed. Until next time, I'm Todd Bishop.
And I'm Kurt Schlosser.
We'll be back next week with a new episode of the GeekWire podcast.